Welcome to everyone. It is a true delight to see you all. As you know, the Kingston Symphony Orchestra has quite an amazing series of concert enhancing initiatives, which we call Before the Downbeat. And our pre concert talk, Meet the Music, is the cornerstone of this series, and it is something that I have missed doing almost as much as the concerts themselves. So I wanted to start off asking Carina a couple of questions about all this. Carina, it's wonderful to have you here today with us, and thank you very much for being part of what we're doing today and for this whole project. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you. I'm really excited to be here to talk about this project. It was a lot of fun. So, yeah.
So let's start by asking you about what was the process for you to record this when you did your solo take, and what were the unique challenges that were there considering how it came to be?
Yeah, so there were quite a few challenges with this method, but it was, I wanted to record it, first of all, in a space that was a little bit larger than what I had available to me at my house. It's not designed like a concert hall, obviously, so the space, it just doesn't quite fill, the sound doesn't fill the room as much as I would have liked, so I had asked if I could use the rehearsal space at the Isabel Bader Performing Arts Center. So I was able to use that hall. And then I had my husband, David, came along and helped me set up all of my equipment. I had a couple of mics. I had close range mics and mics that were a little bit further away as well. And like Evan mentioned, just a camera kind of facing me with that blinking red light.
I mean, it really is. It's hard to really explain the difference until someone actually has experience doing it, because it's like, even with the idea of there's a lot of accompaniment in this particular piece where, say, the violins are playing dump 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 dump, so you have just that sense of the pulse of the piece happening. If you happen to be holding a long note, one thing that you don't really need to think about is how long to hold it for, because you have the support of the music behind you. Whereas in this case, I was not that I was going into it concerned about the long notes, but I thought, gee, there's really the opportunity for, if a long note is really short or really long, it's going to mean that those two bars or whatever that happen in between notes, the tempo is going to get a little bit funky. Now, on the notion of challenge as well, Mozart was someone who had a knack for writing parts for all instruments in a manner that, even while they were challenging, they were at least well suited for the instrument, as opposed to, say, someone like Brahms. And I'm not punching on Brahms, but Brahms wrote obviously stellar music, but it was quite often not particularly idiomatic to play. And so it just meant that there's just that extra level of challenge and obstacle there. How do you feel about the solo part of this piece as Mozart wrote it, and as it relates to the technique of playing the clarinet?
That's exactly right. The part just, it lies really really nicely on the instrument, and I mean Mozart did absolutely have a deep understanding of the instrument and how to really make it shine and sing. I think he knew the range in certain notes that he should highlight to make it sound at its best, really, with in front of the orchestra. So a couple of things. Well, one, first of all, is that he really focused on the clarion register of the instrument. So lots of our notes are kind of written in it's around our mid to upper range on the instrument, and that's really where the sound can just soar above the orchestra. So the majority of this movement is kind of focused on that range. And then also, the piece was originally written for a different type of clarinet than is used right now. So a different type of clarinet than the modern clarinet that I have right here. Um, and it had a little bit of a lower range than the instrument that I have here. So Mozart also highlighted the low range as well, and really kind of focused on those lower notes that really resonated well on that instrument.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because, like, an interesting bit of trivia about this piece is that it was composed with a couple of different possibilities in Mozart's mind with regards to what type of clarinet it would be played on. The standard clarinet at the time, the other clarinet that was Anton Stadler's sort of creation there, and then there's the basset horn. We do have an existing excerpt of this piece that had been sort of set up for the basset horn. So can you tell us a little bit about the differences between these various clarinets, which Mozart sort of had in his ears when he would have potentially been writing for this piece?
Absolutely, yeah. So you mentioned Anton Stadler, so that's who the piece was written for. He was a prominent clarinetist at the time, and he was good friends with Mozart. So I think a lot of Mozart's compositions that were written for clarinet had Stadler in mind, and even, I mean, what I was mentioning before about he had an intimate knowledge of the instrument and the range. I think it was definitely because he was so close with Stadler, he could talk to him about all the differences in the range on the clarinet. So originally, also you mentioned it was written for a basset horn. Well, not originally. There's a sketch that exists that was written for basset horn, which is this is my modern day clarinet. A basset horn is it's a bigger instrument. It has an angled top, so the mouthpiece is kind of on an angle, and then the bell is also quite it's bigger, and it has a lower range. And then the other clarinet that would have existed at the time is a 5-key clarinet. So essentially, this similar to this instrument with not as many keys, only 5 keys. And then, well, I mean, there was just not as many possibilities, and the intonation wasn't quite as good and as stable as the instrument that I have here, which is why they added multiple keys or more keys. And Anton Stadler helped create this new instrument, which was basically an extension that you put on the 5-key clarinet that brought the range down a third lower than they would get on a 5-keyed clarinet.
Now, I know I speak for all of us when I say that I'm so eager for all of you to check out this video as soon as we're done here. So let's talk a little bit about this amazing piece. Mozart wrote this on October 1791, literally just weeks before he died. And one of the great tragedies in music is that he died just shy of his 36th birthday at the very peak of his creative output. To give a bit of context, in terms of quality and quantity, in the last year of his life, Mozart wrote this concerto, which is one of his absolute masterworks. He wrote 2 operas, The Magic Flute, and his opera La Clemenza di Tito. He wrote his brilliant final piano concerto, much of the material for his Requiem, and a lot more. A few seasons back, you may remember that we played his final 3 symphonies back to back, and those were written over the span of 6 weeks total. The last year of his life was essentially that level of productivity and output sustained over 12 months. It has never been equaled as far as I'm concerned. And I'm obviously grateful for the Mozart that we got, but even 6 more months, I just salivate at the thought of what a treasure trove that could have been, because he absolutely died at the point that was, at least to that point in his career. And it's unfathomable that it could have gone any further, but who knows, the peak of output and brilliance. So all this speaks to the quality of Mozart's work here with his Clarinet Concerto, which, as it stands, is the final completed significant work that Mozart wrote in his life. It's obviously one of the most important pieces for the clarinet in the repertoire. It's beloved the world over. It's a piece of true genius, and it is on every single clarinet audition you'll ever find. Now, Carina mentioned Anton Stadler, his close friend, fellow Freemason. In addition to someone Mozart was obviously very fond of and devoted to, he was a generational talent as a clarinetist. And while Mozart had kind of a weird relationship with the man, Stadler was a bit of a selfish and unsavory character. He owed Mozart quite a sum of money upon his death. Mozart's wife hated him. He was also obviously a great muse to Mozart. Since first hearing Stadler play in Mozart's own Grand Partita, another immortal piece of art, this was in a chamber concert in 1874. From that point on, Mozart was certainly thinking about Stadler whenever he wrote for the clarinet, and undoubtedly from his own correspondence and dedications, in the last 2 years of his life, he specifically wrote clarinet parts for Stadler and with Stadler in mind, including the post-premiere, post-publication edition of clarinet parts for his iconic 40th Symphony. So he loved the clarinet, and he loved how Stadler played it, and he was the inspiration for this stupendous work. And, a shady guy he might have been, but I think the clarinet world and music lovers in general owe Stadler a great debt, because he was obviously able to awaken something in Mozart which created, and I don't think that this is really much of a contestable statement, some of the greatest music ever written for the clarinet. Now, one of the great advancements that Mozart brought to the development of music period is that he adopted what's called sonata form for the opening movement of the classical concerto. And very broadly, I know that in my talks we've talked a bit about sonata form in the past. It's a structure that is based around 2 contrasting musical themes. In the sonata form, you have the first theme played, and then the second theme played in a different key. We often hear that chunk again just to get familiar with it. Then we hear a development section where everything gets bumped around, many configurations of these 2 themes in many different keys. And then we hear them both again in their proper order, both in the same key. So very broadly, it is form which is based around statement, departure, return. Now, for a symphony or for a string quartet, it's an optimal format with lots of room for surprise, subversion of expectation. One would think that it is a difficult form to apply for a concerto, which is why nobody really did that until Mozart came around and solidified that as the dominant form for concertos, because nothing is difficult for Mozart. And now it's impossible to think of concertos as having any other form. Let's listen to the opening of the piece, which tees up the first statement of the clarinet. And there's nothing you really need to say just about the quality and the nature of that. I mean, it's again, I always come back to this. Mature composers, one of the reasons why the Kingston Symphony does symphonic festivals of composers in their mature period is because they've gone past establishing themselves, they've gone past experimentation, and they just simply transcend. And what they do aesthetically, it's the sort of thing that you can't academically explain. I mean, you can try, and certainly many do. But the reality is, it just becomes a matter of such mastery of the craft that you are inspired to a whole level of inspiration and transcendence. It's really something to behold. Now, the next excerpt that I'm going to play is that quirky last segment I mentioned, that one motive, that closing idea, which occurs right before the clarinet entrance. It goes basically dia, dia, tum, ta, tum, ta, tia. This is the musical closing idea, which you hear in this movement at the end of almost every single major section of the movement. And it's something that you can usually hear pretty easily. And the great thing about that is you can chart your progress by spotting it. So the opening entrance with the clarinet showcases the soloist performing the first theme of the piece with the typical elaborations and flourishes to showcase the solo artist, and at the same time satisfying all the expected sonata form structural requirements. And of course, because Mozart's a very fine composer, it makes usage of a wide register of the instrument and a huge display of its technical capabilities. And for me, it's some of the greatest expository clarinet writing which exists. So here's that closing gesture signal music, followed by the opening exposition entrance of the clarinet. And so that just gives, again, a sense of how effortless Mozart is able to take this incredibly complicated idea and stuff it with life and sparkle and vigor and just an ease of craftsmanship that it just seems like it came from him with not even piece by piece, but just entirely formed by itself. I mean, Mozart's pretty singular in that aspect, and it's one of those talents. I mentioned Stadler as obviously a generational talent. It's kind of a foolish argument to have over like who is the best composer, but I think in terms of the greatest musical intellect, there's a pretty easy case to make for Mozart simply because of just the astonishing ability, which is sort of exponentially beyond what regular human beings could ever seemingly aspire to. So now we work our way through the exposition of the two themes and into the development section where we have all the usual expected trimmings. We eventually come to a fascinating little diversion, which is a dramatic orchestral break with a bold sequence that, as it turns, sets us up apropos of almost nothing. A no-nonsense return to the recapitulation, which is the final section of the movement where we just hear those two themes again. It also serves as the only second substantial break that the soloist has had since the first entrance. The clarinet, after its first entrance, is playing virtually throughout, I would say, most of this entire piece. In fact, there's offhand, there's nary a break to be had in the slow movement. And in this piece, with this movement, which is obviously very technically demanding, this break, I think, represents about 20 bars. Everything else is either marginally shorter or significantly shorter in terms of breaks there. So it's really quite something to behold. Again, obviously something that Mozart had Stadler's stamina and endurance in mind. And I guess generations of clarinets can thank him one way or another for that. Naturally, this whole passage is also perfect. It's inspiring. It's a wonderful return to the recapitulation, and it transcends the form, the rules, and everything academic. It is just exactly everything that it needs to be. So this is the last section of the development section with the orchestra break, and then the no nonsense return to the recapitulation, and the soloist coming back in. So I happen to have, as I love structural analysis. It's actually too bad in the sense that I'm a conductor, because there's only so much that you can really convey about structure of a piece in the conducting of it. One of the things that I have a particular fascination with regards to the structure of sonata form, is the nature of the return from the development section into that final statement of those themes. And there's just something, given that the way that it's typically set up is with a great deal of anticipation. And they use that, it's usually through harmony that's done that. And the people that subvert that best, in my opinion, generally speaking, Mozart and Brahms. Beethoven to a degree, but definitely Mozart and Brahms. The recapitulation, for example, in the first movement of Brahms' Second Symphony is something that, like, even just like right now, I can't believe. Like I have a hard time understanding how it was even possible, how Brahms could come to it. I think it's just one of the most profound things. And for Mozart to just throw it away like one of life's joys in this case, 2 months before his death, actually. Of course, he wasn't sick at this point, but it's just something that perpetually amazes me about Mozart and his ability. And I'm just so grateful that someone like that was able to live and give us these great gifts. So now we can consider ourselves and the music well met. We're looking forward to the future. We're optimistic. We couldn't be happier to have you coming along for the ride. It's impossible to overstate exactly how much that means to all of us.